Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Tonight, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, will join me here to discuss how we as a nation come back from the coronavirus as the president tries to steer the country towards a premature reopening and repeat mistakes the administration's failed response to the crisis. We also had happened in the last few months, right? 3 absolutely deadly errors made from the beginning of the pandemic by the president and his administration. 1, just not taking the virus seriously enough, not appreciating what a dangerous, novel virus it is from the beginning. 2, not having adequate testing capacity. And 3, thinking that the problem to be managed is the economy, as if that is somehow separate from the public health emergency of fighting the virus. Those mistakes gave us the whole disastrous response from the White House, the failed test kits, the utter inability for weeks to ramp up testing to know where the virus was and how prevalent it was, the fact that they took way too long to begin to recommend social distancing, the fact the president, during this entire period as the virus was spreading, would come out and do a series of song and dance routines to pump up the stock market as if that was the goal instead of taking action on the virus, right? All those errors are what got us to this point. Right now, there are almost 30,000 Americans who've lost their lives. It's an incomprehensible toll. New York City death toll alone shot past 10,000 today, just in New York City, after a revised count added 3,700 additional people who had not been counted. And today, the daily toll of fatalities is the highest daily number that we've had so far. All of that is crushing. We know, though, if there's some bright silver lining to find here, that death and fatality is a lagging indicator in battling this pandemic. And there definitely is some seriously good news in the data elsewhere. Hospitalizations, for instance, have fallen in New York. Other places like Maryland appear to have reached their peak. But as we are trying to get through the worst of it right now, it appears the Trump administration is literally remaking all the same mistakes, the same 3 mistakes they made in the beginning, nearly 3 months after we got our first case. Still, to this date, the president still fails to truly appreciate just how transmissible and dangerous the virus is. He is set on opening up the country as soon as possible. He floated Easter a few weeks ago. And all the experts say if you just open up back up without a plan, the virus is going to come back, and then we will be right back where we started. And what do you think the stock market's going to do with that? Every expert, from Trump's former FDA chief to the Yale professors who wrote this in USA Today, laying out how they would open up the country, to basically every doctor, epidemiologist, and public expert who has been on this show for weeks, insisting we need to massively scale up widespread available testing if we want to open the country back up. In fact, here's what Dr. Anthony Fauci told the Associated Press just today.
I think if we are assuming that 2 weeks from now, that all the curves are going to be down, I think that's a bit overly optimistic. I think how you reopen, if you want to use that word, the economy in those communities is going to depend a lot on the ability to contain what we know will happen. I'll guarantee you, once you start pulling back, there will be infections. It's how you deal with the infection that's going to count.
There will be infections. That's Dr. Fauci talking about just how transmissible and dangerous the virus is. Not thinking best case scenario, thinking worst case scenario. And yet here we are 3 months into this. Trump is still trying to think best case scenario. Number 2, once again, testing remains the major problem. Now, we ramped up testing quite a bit, but we have now plateaued in the level that we are testing out. And the New York Times has this devastating report about all the bottlenecks and the inefficiencies that are slowing down testing all over the country. But get this, while everyone's saying we need to test and we need to test widely, and it's a Apollo moon mission to get to the amount of testing we need, the president himself just said there's no need for testing in areas of the country. There's only a small number of cases. That is the opposite of the truth. That's the whole thing about the virus, right? Every place starts with a small number of cases, then it grows. That's why you need testing. And then the third and final error, it's been clear from the very beginning Very clear, painfully clear. The president has focused on what this pandemic means for him personally and his political fortunes, his reelection, and he views his political fortunes as tied to the state of the economy. So when the stock market started to crater because of fears about the pandemic, Trump was mad. He wanted to bring the markets back up instead of fighting the virus and letting the markets take care of themselves after the virus was vanquished. And now he is watching an unprecedented economic contraction, which is genuinely awful, brutal, miserable, Great Depression level during this pandemic. And he now wants to just bring the economy back as if that's some separate thing other than the virus, just like he did back in late February, when the expert consensus back then was we needed to move to mitigation and social distancing and lockdowns. New York Times reports on the evidence of the failed response documented in the so-called Red Dawn emails. The top disaster response official at Health and Human Services decided on February 24th to recommend to Mr. Trump he publicly support the start of those mitigation efforts, such as school closings. But before they could discuss it with the president, who was returning from India, another official went public with a warning, sending the stock market down sharply and angering Mr. Trump. The meeting to brief him on the recommendation was canceled, and it was 3 weeks before Mr. Trump would reluctantly come around to the need for mitigation. The administration did nothing. And so now the president has appointed a task force of unqualified lackeys who want to reopen the economy without even one public health voice. That's the problem, right? The public health part of it is the problem. Politico reports, for now, the council is expected to include White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, National Economic Council Director Larry Kudlow, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, Vice President Mike Pence, who is not expected to play a leading role. But it's just the same mistake, literally the same mistake all over again. He was late to act. Thousands of people have died. Now he wants to be too early and risk the same disaster. We all want the nation to reopen. We need a national strategy to do that. But thanks to this president, that is completely absent once again. I mean, there's a lot we do not know about this virus. We just don't know everything about it, and it's frustrating. A lot we do not know about, and there's internal debate amongst very smart people about a lot of things. But there are some crystal clear areas of consensus, just as there were back in February. And once again, the president is ignoring them.